to this computer. Hi, friends. I hope that you all had a really terrific spring break. Is that what it's called? I guess. Whatever it was where we didn't do anything here for a week. Um, as a father of a preschool child, we have a February break, a March break, an April break, all for a week at a time. So I don't know which of those three is considered spring break, but we get 3 spring breaks. Yeah. So today we have some presentations. We have a quick special guest, and we're going to delve into the nuts and bolts of accessibility planning. This is getting a little bit away from the last few weeks of exploring the art in the plays and the playwrights and having conversations, and get into the nitty gritty of step-by-step scaffolding, what it takes to begin to be self-aware, capacity build, beef up your expectations and your planning so you can responsibly and ethically and successfully invite folks into your space where they and you and everybody is set up for success so we can all be met together and all of that good stuff. So I'm imagining I'm going to get a bunch of panicked emails. Okay. Late to class. Okay. All right, cool. People are late to class. No worries. So presentations rather. We're gonna go I think it's Laura, then Aaron, then Casey, if that's cool, right? All right, cool. Laura, hit it from the road.
I'm coming back from Vegas, baby. I'm sharing the screen here. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so there we are. I'm doing my presentation on a company called Teatro Patologico, which is in Rome, actually. And the reason, I'm trying to figure out how I go into presentation mode here, hold on. There we go. And the reason why I chose them is because I got to go see them in a show at La Mama Theater in New York. I was going to make their work and the work of other groups similar, the focus of my master's thesis when I did my master's degree, my MA. But then I ended up having to switch. So, but I'd like to still pursue the research I used when I met with them and saw them, because they were amazing. So this is kind of different because it's in England, and pathologico makes us think of pathological, but it means emotions. And that is something that they use in Italy to help people with mental disabilities and intellectual and all of that kind of thing. So this is the founder, Dario D'Ambrosi, who's also an actor. He's been in quite a few films that you might have seen him in, but not just in smaller roles. He started off, well, he's pretty famous in Italy. He was actually going to be a professional soccer player, but he sort of became an actor to piss off his parents, basically. And so he's very talented. He spent 19 months actually, oh no, when he was 19, he spent a few months in a mental institution in Rome. And there were children there. And so when he got out, and he was there for research, and I'm not really sure why, he doesn't really say why he was there for research, but when he got out, he kept thinking about it and writing about it, and he decided to set up a theater within the psychiatric institution, and he taught children's drama in there. In the 80s, he moved to New York to work with, and he struck up a relationship with Ellen Storta at La Mama, it's a very famous theater. She's very famous as well. And he kind of he told this story when I was with them. And the story was about how she did not want to have anything to do with him, and he worked super hard to convince her to let him create work there. Not with his students just yet, his own thing. All right. So in 1988, he actually held a theater festival in the mental hospital, and um, he just continued to work with patients with physical and mental disabilities, and went back and forth to New York. And then eventually he opened a converted warehouse and made a school out of it, which he has a resident company of professional actors, but also a drama school there. And it's the first of its kind in Europe, actually, that deals with young adults, students, people of all ages. He has a company of actors, some with disabilities, who do his shows pretty regularly. And here's a quote from the New York Times. He's Europe's first drama school for people with disabilities who create original works of theater as actors, designers, and playwrights. There's 15 teaching artists that instruct 60 students, and this was a while back. It's bigger now, including people who have schizophrenia, they're catatonic, manic depressive, autistic, Down syndrome, and this all goes under the same umbrella of what they call emotional help, which is not what we think of. It's different. So let's see. So the Academy offers all kinds of courses, as you can see, so they can learn all different aspects of theater. They also do music therapy. They also teach social skills for some of their students with autism and other students who might need help with that. And right now he's coordinating with this university. He started in 2016, and it's a research study as well as him working with students and his teachers working with students to basically create proof that drama has really, really helped these students to just have better lives in the world. So let's see. These are the goals for this study. Let's see, I'm just seeing what's important to note here. Integrate theater and integrate them also more into society and also to support their families. So yeah, and here's a picture of them. I took this one. This is when I was there. And this was the stage. So they do a lot of classics, and this was Medea. And that was part of the reason why I got a hold of them because I was writing about Greek adaptations of Greek tragedy. So you can see all the white, which at the end of the play was completely covered in fake blood. And the floor, and these were not children, by the way, these were their adult students. That would be horrible. And the floor was it's plastic, so they just take it off and put a new floor down every show, I think. So it was pretty incredible. I took these pictures. I didn't take any pictures during the show. These were the curtain calls. Dario brings up each student to take a bow, which is really cool. And what they did was they made the chorus. Oh, this is the guy who played Jason. And look at him by the end. He was covered with blood. This is Titus Andronicus. So what they did, let me go back to Medea for a minute. What they did in Medea was made the chorus, who was made up of his company of actors with disabilities, the more central, cut off a lot of the dialogue. And so as the chorus, they were using like these staffs as instruments and also as a way of conversing and communicating. They use a lot of music. I got to watch their drama warm up, and they use music as part of their warm up and vocalizations. It was really amazing. These are some other productions. This is them doing a warm up here. And the actors who are in the show who don't have a disability necessarily, they also teach the students. So the man in the center here, I think he's the one who played Jason. So he's also a teacher, which I think is really cool. So here's a closer look at them with these staffs they use. And there's instrument playing and chanting, and they help to create what they did. So there are participants in the directing. There's Medea, and there's my works cited. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I got to watch their warm up. I got to be listen to a Q&A with Dario and some of his other founding members of the company, and ask questions about what they did. And at the end of the show, the actors come around and they all shake our hands, which was really cool. And it feels very inclusive of the audience and immersive, the way that they do their shows. So that's that. Any questions?
Awesome. Hey, actually, Laura, what I'm going to have to do because Alejandra's going to join at 5:30 and cut out by 6. So I want to hear the presentations and then do questions if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. That was awesome. Aaron, yeah. Aaron, you are up.
Okay, I'm gonna preface this by just letting everybody know that I get really, really nervous in doing stuff like this. So I apologize if I talk really, really fast. Okay, so okay, so can you see the presentation? Great.
Yeah.
So I have script. I'm just gonna follow the script. Not be nervous, follow the script. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Erin Urich, and I will be presenting on Hiba Toulan, who is a magnificent performer in the deaf and theater communities of Houston, Texas. Hiba was born in Doki Giza in Egypt and moved to Washington, D.C. when she was 2 years old. She loved theater from a very young age and spent time studying acting in high school and while attending college at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. Her degree is in communications and not theater as a result of her mother's feeling that theater is not a sustainable career option. Instead, she got married and worked as a counselor with disability services and was a chairperson for the Deaf Women of Houston organization. While studying at NTID, Hiba received a grant to study at the Shakespeare Theater Company in Washington, D.C. She has also taken several workshops and classes with several companies listed on this site, where she has studied audition skills, scene work, monologues, TV and film acting, but mostly focusing on Shakespeare. After divorcing her husband, Hiba decided to refocus her life on her passions and rediscovering herself. With her friend Brian Chan, she started attending monthly Insta meets for photographers and models who are starting out so that they can get experience and network. Through these meetings, she gained the confidence to sign on with a modeling agency, but was told that at 5'7", she's too short to be a professional model. So she decided to return to acting. She auditioned for the Scottish play at Points North Theatre Company's Arts in the Park Festival and was cast in the role of Hecate, seen here. She was and continues to be grateful for director Sean Thompson for working with her and trying to make the experience as accessible as possible. He learned ASL so that he could more easily communicate with her and tries to find new and creative ways for her to participate in his productions, of which she has participated in 4. Macbeth, The Tempest, Othello, and Henry V. I first worked with her in the Vagina Monologues at Lone Star College Sci-Fair, where she performed the monologue My Vagina Was My Village about the violence against women in the Bosnian War, and also contributed to the Moaning for the woman who liked to make vaginas happy. We worked together again, sharing the role of Ariel in Shakespeare's The Tempest with Points North, in 2020, where Hiba interacted as Ariel with Prospero and the other characters, while myself and another actress presented her minions, who spoke the dialogue and acted as extensions of her magic. She's played several other roles in Houston, including Gwendolyn in The Picture of Dorian Gray at Haven Arts Theater. During the pandemic, Hiba consistently worked with Zoom Shakespeare, among her favorite roles being Hero in Much Ado About Nothing, as well as other online theatrical productions. She has also been seen in several TV shows and short films. She has a supporting role in the upcoming film Bailey's Voice through Magic Fire Productions about a young girl with nonverbal autism, and a leading role in the thrilling short film Senses from Her House Media, where, quote, 2 friends, one blind and one deaf, use their senses to defend themselves from a robbery gone wrong, end quote. Her most recent adventure took her to Austin, Texas, where she was part of the ensemble for Zach Theater's production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. This was a joint production with Deaf Austin Theater and starred Sandra Mae Frank as Ella. The cast went through an ASL boot camp so that everyone could learn basic sign language and have the opportunity to really communicate with their deaf, hard of hearing castmates. She said this was an enriching experience where there were no voiced interpreters, Just Deaf Acting. She was delighted to work with a hearing and deaf director, as well as several deaf designers. This was her first Actors Equity credit, and she decided to join the union for additional opportunities, as well as to receive a competitive edge. When asked about how she would like to see the theater community grow, she had a lot to say. She stated she doesn't feel it is appropriate to call her an activist, though she does use her social media platforms to speak out regarding issues that matter to her, such as racial equality, awareness for disabilities, support for the trans and queer communities, and the Palestinian cause. And she is very politically minded. She would like to see more theaters include opportunities for people with disabilities, not only on stage, but in the audience as well, including touch tours and captions. Captions, captions, captions. She would like theaters to reach out and collaborate within their communities to feature plays that tell stories with disabilities and include performers that embody them, using consultants to make sure that each person is included and adequately represented on the production team. I have included in my presentation links to Hiba's own website, as well as her Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube pages, where you can see some of her performances and audition monologues, as well as her IMDb. I've also provided her Linktree page so you can access her other casting pages. Thank you.
Great job, Erin.
Yay.
Awesome. And you know, props to you for working through your nerves. That was an excellent presentation. Casey.
Okay, it's me. Let me screen share, and I'll try to talk fast. How about that? Okay, so I'm going to talk about Backlight Productions, which, can y'all see that? Is that okay?
Yes.
Make it a little bigger. Backlight Productions, which is located, it's a local company here I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's local to Nashville. And it is a company that is committed to theater arts for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And actually think there's a bit of crossover here, Laura, with the company you were talking about. So it's kind of cool. So a little bit about Backlight. It was founded in 2011 by a woman named Melissa Smith. And as I said, it's for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And at Backlight, they receive the opportunity to take part in full-scale productions and performing arts classes as valued and respected performers. They have the opportunity to perform lead roles, which is really sort of an important part of this. Melissa really wants her actors to be in lead roles. And I'll talk about some of the creative ways that she accommodates for them. She also provides quality training. So beyond the productions, there are classes that work on improving speech, expression, coordination, and overall confidence. Her goal is to teach her students to commit to long-term projects, work as a team, and give them a consistent community that they're never going to age out of. So there's no maximum age of participation here. I believe there is a minimum age. I couldn't find their exact minimum age, but I know that she specifically does not work with children. She doesn't feel like that's sort of her specialty. So that she does not work with children, but there's no maximum age. Backlight promotes integration is really important by partnering with local professionals and organizations to incorporate professional artists alongside students in every production. So the artists that participate will actually take a step back from the spotlight and use their time on stage to support and promote Backlight students. I'll talk about that more later too. Okay. Oops. I'm scrolling on the wrong place. I'm scrolling through your Zoom pictures instead of scrolling through the slides. Okay. So the mission is to provide opportunities for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities to gain education in the arts and perform significant roles in integrated performances, enabling them to enhance their social skills through artistic expression and grow in confidence, both on stage and off. I think some of the key words there are integrated performances, and gaining education, along with performing significant roles, right? The vision, the aim of Backlight is to keep people with disabilities from getting lost in the background in the performing arts world. They want to use the performing arts not just to entertain, but to directly influence lives for the better. Backlight began as a way to bring some happiness and has become a way of promoting selflessness, empathy, kindness, and integration. You'll see that word integration a lot. Okay, so a little bit about what's offered. So music classes. We are in Music City, so there are music classes offered. Kind of a cool shot here of some of the students performing at Tootsie's in downtown Nashville. So some of the music classes are rock band, which includes songwriting and basic skills in piano, guitar, drums. This class culminates in an opportunity to record at a recording studio in Nashville, and everyone receives their own original album at the end of it. Kind of cool. There's also a glee club, which is sort of like a show choir. So it's music and dance both, and also culminates in a performance. Like the fall semester performance was in the city of Franklin, which is right next door, has a big Christmas parade. And so the glee club performed on a big float in the Christmas parade. There are also dance classes. This is the dance team is a new addition to Backlight's offerings, but it's actually a competitive dance team, and they learn multiple solo and group numbers and attend a competition in Chattanooga. And there's actually a category at this competition specifically for dancers from the IDD community, which is pretty cool. And then there's also a creative movement class, which is more for students who require direct assistance or the help of a caretaker in their daily life. So this is more for the students who have wheelchair or who are wheelchair users or have more limited mobility. And they also have 2 performance opportunities in this class. So this year, for example, it was in the Christmas parade, and also they'll be in the ensemble of their spring theater production. The theater classes are sort of the heart of Backlight. So in this category, they have a New Works Writers Lab, which is exactly what it sounds like. Instructors guide students through from inception through to the end. And at the end of the class, the students get to see their original works performed by professional actors. They do a staged reading with professional actors. And then there are full productions as well. Multiple levels are offered of these productions. So they do 2 full productions a year. One is considered like beginner intermediate. So those roles are going to be broken up in smaller bits. And then an advanced, intermediate, advanced, where the students take on a little bit more responsibility. So let me talk more about those. So the productions would not be possible without all of the partnerships. They always partner with local professional actors. As I said, the professional actors will be in the rehearsal process from day one. And basically, they are co-cast with the Backlight students. So for example, I should also mention that the roles for Backlight students are broken up. So for example, there may be 4 or 5 students playing the role of Shrek in Shrek the Musical. And each time Shrek exits the stage, the next time he has an entrance, it's a new student coming on to play the role. And that is just so that chunks are more manageable. It's a little bit less to memorize. But there's one professional actor who's going to partner with all of the actors, all of the Backlight students playing Shrek. And they will work alongside them to figure out how to best support them on stage. One example is that there was a Backlight actor who memorized everything by numbers. And so the professional actor, while he was on stage with the Backlight actor, would say, would jog the Backlight actor's memory by prompting him with a number. And he would just say, number 32. And then the Backlight actor would know exactly where he was in the script and would say his line. It was amazing. The Backlight also partners with theater companies in town to help the production elements. So this production of Shrek that is pictured here was produced in partnership with Nashville Children's Theater. And then this summer, they're going to begin rehearsals for a production of Cinderella, which will be performed at Tennessee Performing Arts Center, which is the local touring house facility here in Nashville. Backlight has gotten some national recognition as well. It was featured on PBS American Anthems. I didn't know about this show, but it's a TV show. It was a national TV show on PBS. And if you want to see the clip about it, this will be linked in the presentation. You can click on this picture and it'll take you to that link, but it's kind of cool. It's national attention for this local organization. It is mostly grant funded. Some of the grants come from Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, Tennessee Arts Commission, Tennessee Disability Coalition, and lots others. But that's just sort of give you an example of where their funding is coming from for these massive productions that they put on. If you want to find out more, if you're curious, here's their website that's linked. And this is a great video that just gives you, you can hear Melissa, the founder, talking a little bit about the organization and where they came from and their history. So that's Backlight.
Awesome. Thank you all so very, very much. That was great. 3 organizations or people that we have not really delved into. So that's cool. Alejandra is here in the house. How's it going? Friends who have presentations, because we have a unique situation today where we have a guest who is coming to us from the theater before call time. We're probably going to chat and then hop back to the questions about the presentations, if that's okay. I don't know of your time, Laura, in the car, and Casey, if you're here for the whole class or just for this. If not, whatever you need to do. If you have to depart, we'll catch the questions on the recording, but hopefully you can hang out. How's it going, friend? Can you unmute?
Yes, here I am. Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So I know you're a little bit short on time, so tell us, who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
Well, my name is Alejandra Ospina, and as you know, I do a little bit of everything. I am a disabled performer, arts admin, audio describer, narrator. Right at this very moment, I'm in the dressing room at the Public Theater in Manhattan before my call time for a play called Dark Disabled Stories, which opened here on March 9th. It was originally slated to run through the 26th and has now been extended twice for the final time to April 9th. And Dark Disabled Stories is written by Ryan J. Haddad, who is my friend and colleague. Like myself, he has cerebral palsy. He is gay, I am not, so he got to write a fun, spicy play about being gay in New York, and also the things that are not so great about living in New York as a disabled person, getting around. I was brought on to this play because I work as an audio describer, which is describing film, media, and live performance for blind and low vision audiences. And I do that to tape and I do that live. And Ryan said to me a few years ago at the start of the pandemic, I'm workshopping this play. I would like for it to be more accessible from the outset than most plays are, because most plays audio description gets added after the fact. And it also happens not for every performance. Maybe a few performances in a run here and there are special captioned audio described performances, relaxed performances. So Ryan wanted his play to ultimately be all the things all at once, if at all possible. So I began to work through the play with him and insert descriptions. And then I began to argue with him because he wrote a scene about his experience as someone who has cerebral palsy and uses a mobility device in the New York City subway and on the buses. He uses a posterior walker, the kind of walker you roll behind you to walk with. I don't walk at all. So I started to editorialize what he was saying, and I would say, well, I can describe what's happening in this scene, but that's not what happens to me as someone who uses a motorized wheelchair. So eventually he said, well, why don't you include your stories? Now, I didn't have exciting hookup, kinky, queer stories, but I did have my share of transit nightmares and physical access nightmares as a wheelchair user. So I said, okay, let's do that. Long story short, as the pandemic progressed, we did several workshops over Zoom of this play, and there was already interest from theaters, 2 theaters here in New York, who wanted to put on this play. And ultimately, this play is a co-production between the Bushwick Star, who is the producing theater, and the Public Theater, who has the facilities to put it on, because Bushwick Star, quite frankly, doesn't currently have a physically accessible space, so we couldn't put it on at their space. Yeah, I would have loved to do it at Queen's Theater. I love Queen's Theater. A bit of a schlep to get there, but I love it. So, Bushwick Star, Public Theater, Happy Marriage. We began to workshop this play in November of last year, but we were missing a piece. Ryan's intention in the radically accessible version of Dark Disabled Stories, which was originally a one-man show that he had performed multiple times, but in this version, he really wanted a deaf performer, not just someone deaf using sign language interpreting to the side, but a deaf performer embodying Ryan's one-man stories about queerness and disability in the jungle that is New York. So he found an amazing performer named Dickie Hartz, who is also connected to Queen's Theater, because Dickie and I had gone through the Theater for All Early Career Actor Initiative in 2018. So that was a happy coincidence. And once Dickie came on board in November, he was able to add his own story of being deaf and having, you know, sexual experiences that were a little iffy and being fabulous and amazing. And the show added a director of artistic sign language, and we were off and running. So we're a very tech heavy show. All of our crew stays up in the booth because we have to worry about our lighting cues being exact and our closed captions happening all at the right times. And Ryan has to talk and Dickie has to sign simultaneously, and they have to match. And so our tech was pretty brutal, 10, 12 hours of tech to get all our cues right. And we still haven't gotten it right. A couple of weeks ago, we had to stop the show right in the middle. We had to cancel both of our invited dress rehearsals because our captions weren't working, but we're really, really, really committed to having all of our pieces of access available. We also have a scale model of our set, which is tactile for folks who are able to come in and touch it so that they can have an experience of what that's like. We also have a relaxed performance. Folks can get up and go to our chill out space. We made sure that our programs were printed in Braille at the theater. So we really are doing our level best to do what we consider a radically accessible show. The final frontier is this show should be streaming for folks who can't join us. Ryan's previous production, Hi, Are You Single, which I provided more traditional audio description for in post-production, was streamed during the pandemic because that's the option that there was in 2021. But it's a little more complicated. This is off Broadway as opposed to off Broadway, and there's unions involved and there's money involved, and it's gonna happen. Ryan is very aspirational, and so there are talks. HBO has talked to folks, and maybe Bravo and maybe Netflix. And then we'd have to restage it because we can't do a single camera shot of a play with pink walls and white artistic captions. It won't work. So once everything is in place, I would like to imagine that within the year, Dark Disabled Stories will be available on a streamer somewhere. And then I'll be happy, because I know plenty of people in my life, friends and loved ones, who would never be able to make it here for so many reasons and really want to see this show. And we really believe a lot in this show. And I have been telling people it's the best job I've ever had. It's killing me a little bit because it's a lot of work for a middle-aged, disabled, sometimes performer to be doing, but I'm very happy to be doing it. And I know I just sort of threw a lot of things at you all at once, so I'm happy to slow down for a minute and take any questions.
That's awesome. Yeah, please ask questions. And then if you have time, I just want to ask you more specifically about your work as an audio describer, because that's of great interest to many people here.
Absolutely. That's why I came to the theater first. I do have a little more time.
Awesome. All right. So hit any questions about the public theater, Dark Disabled Stories, and her role in that. Ashley, are you muted and don't want to be muted?
No, I was saying to myself, all my questions are about audio description.
Okay.
I'll ask in part 2.
I think that's amazing. Just of course, like all things lead back to what we're doing here. Ryan, this past year when we had the Ford Festival, I offered Ryan a workshop slot here, but Ryan was busy and couldn't do it for a cabaret space. And it seems like the show grew, and I don't think at that point it was like being talked about with the public, but it wasn't locked down. That production developed from a solo show to what it is now, and then found a production and a co-production, and has completed a run and has extended all within a year's amount of time. And just to put in context how phenomenal that is, if we talk about compare that to Cost of Living, which had a development process starting back in like 2015 or 16 or something, and then kind of exploded up all the way like a 6 or 7 year process. This thing went from really a sort of idea to a full-fledged developed production with co-productions within a year. That is incredible.
I want to clarify on Ryan's behalf. Ryan has been working on Dark Disabled Stories since 2017.
Right. Okay. I didn't know, because when we had talked about it, it seemed like there was a need for a workshop, but hadn't had one yet, if I remember correctly. But that still, regardless of that, incredibly fast. And especially
Yes, the momentum, once we got moving for sure.
Yeah, and including
It's a rarity. It's a rarity for sure.
Yes, and to hear that there's these aspirations to do Netflix and accessible, I think that's great, because as you're pointing out, and we've dealt with this a lot here too, the once the pandemic happened and somehow Equity and other unions decided that even doing something on Zoom was their territory, things really red taped and snowballed and had paywalls and all this stuff associated very, very quickly. And whereas before, these things could be really looked at through the lens of an accessibility feature that had very little inhibitions other than the capacity of organizations to execute on that work that had the streaming capabilities. Now it is.
I'll tell you what, if it were up to me, we would have streamed it yesterday, but it's not up to me.
I know it is an awful situation, even to do a reading that we are totally hosting here on the internet, like for Ford Festival and other for the L'Arc Epithete stuff that we before times could do very easily on Zoom, now costs probably double the amount of money to do a Zoom presentation it is in person. and so it's extremely cost prohibitive. And it is really an assault on accessibility and accessibility features. And I totally get what they're trying to do, which is protect the artist and saying now that we have access to the digital world, that people are entitled to. I get what the intent is, but at the detriment of accessibility. And paying $100 to watch a play streamed at a specific time on the internet, creates different accessibility, i.e. financial constraints. And so it's really something that has to be solved. And it goes back to a little bit about what Greg was talking about, some of the issues on cost of living and the things that they had to battle constantly. So I appreciate that you shared that you're looking at this as a Netflix or Bravo or making an iteration of this work that is recorded live performance. So incorporate those things, like maybe like what Oliver got to do with What the Constitution Means to Me. And I think that would be great if we could have this. How very cool.
I, as a singular human person, will not rest until this play is streaming somewhere, even if I have to bootleg it myself.
I love it. And hopefully we'll center your audio description as part of the experience, right? Like laid over.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I had not done a lot of acting in the last few years, and I was really surprised when Ryan said, no, you are also a character. So I had to do double duty. And so my audio description has morphed from the sort of standard neutral show, don't tell, to show and tell and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Which has been very interesting.
We're reading this one.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should read that.
Yeah, it's good. But we had Molly Joyce here a few weeks ago too, just talking about aesthetic and incorporation and really hand in hand with what Molly was talking. I love that you all figured out how to make you a character and like artfully incorporate the work on stage as part of the action of the play, and not just as a feature, but rather as a centered part of the narrative. That is awesome.
I will toot my own horn. A most recent review called my audio description velvet voiced. I haven't been reviewed in anything since I was a kid, so it's fun. It's fun. Most of the reviews have been outstandingly positive. I was concerned that folks would find the incorporation of all the access to be too much. And so far, some folks, we've had talkbacks and things, and folks who are less accustomed to things like audio description and captions, especially artistic captions that sort of jump at you from the stage. Some folks have said, yeah, at first I didn't know what to pay attention to, who to listen to, who to watch, because Dickie is also signing continuously. But folks have really settled into it, particularly folks who are not as accustomed, and that makes me feel good about it.
That's awesome.
It means that all productions can do it all the time, everywhere.
Yeah, I love it. That's true. And I think it takes something like what you're doing to show at that level of the public theater, which like the public does a pretty good job with accessibility generally. I don't say they're the they kind of go in and out of it like so many places do, but
they're making a really concerted effort, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this here. It's how cool of them to really center this and trust you as the artist to kind of like bring that expertise and that know-how without kind of, how do I say it, like they're not thought leadering you to death. They're letting you all be the thought leaders, and they're in like the learning space and putting the art forward, and that's great.
Including the fact that we have an access dramaturg specifically. Allison Kopit is our access dramaturg. So it's not just on us as disabled performers to say, what about this and this and this? Because Allison is behind the scenes, having already thought about a majority of those things as a disabled person herself.
Great. And did you all have a sensitivity or intimacy coordinator on the show as well?
So we don't have an intimacy coordinator, but we do have someone who has done a lot of just check-ins with regard to overall sensitivity training in general, because the nature of the show doesn't involve like physical contact. It's not that kind of intimacy, but we've talked a lot about what is appropriate and desired in a sort of disability context. And we've done, you know, the full gamut of sensitivity training in general that the public is very on top of. So we all feel very taken care of. We've had multiple cast and crew wide check-ins about how we feel about things, if we feel supported. So the public and Bushwick Star in conjunction have been very on top of that for us as a cast and crew. They're very clued into what we might need. And if they don't know, they have been very receptive to things that they may not have been aware of. I think I'm spoiled on this gig because it's been a very long time since I've been in a space where people are endeavoring to do their best to really take care of all the loose ends, even if they don't always know what they are.
A couple weeks ago, we had Greg here to talk about some of the hiccups and backstage battles that he was sort of as the equity leader, like kind of like ongoing through cost of living, including like some of what like Reagan went through as the understudy for that role, and the different battles they had to fight just to get basic like needs met at the Broadway level, right? And it sounds like you're having
That's a little frightening to me, because again, I'm slightly a lower rung. You know, I've only just with this production had the opportunity to even consider joining the union, but the union has just every step of the way, everything has just, again, because it's as cost of living I assumed would be, but it's a very disabled space. And we have again our Dazzle and our Access dramaturg, and it's just a very disability minded production from the bottom up. You know, I can't speak to what happened at cost of living, but
I was
here,
gonna ask you, I didn't get to the question, which was if you, based on that, I was just gonna ask, did you all as a company have any, you're beaconing that you've had support along the way in meetings and all that stuff, and like sort of baked into the cake of your production and your feedback and the kind of praxis-based stuff around the work, which sounds cool. But did you have any significant hiccups? I know you had some artistic things you had to get through with Ryan, but from a production standpoint, did you have any?
so from a production standpoint, here at the public, so obviously COVID is real and still exists. Here at the public, they have been very specific about their testing protocols for cast and crew, and I've appreciated that. The public has a policy where 2 days a week are mask required for all of their shows. Our production had to convince the public, and this is something that used to be part of my prologue as a performer, but it's now a pre-show, pre-recorded speech. We ask and provide masks for all audiences at every one of our performances, not just Tuesdays and Saturdays, because that's something that we as a cast and a crew felt really strongly about. So all of our shows are mask-only shows, which eliminated the need for a lot of our potential audiences, friends and colleagues of mine, disabled people, all were like, well, I really want to come, but I really want to come on a masked day. So all the days at our show are masked. And while we can't force people to do it, and people, you know, there will be a few people here and there, by and large, all of our audiences at all of our shows remain masked because we have asked them to please do that to protect us and themselves. But that was something that took a little doing.
I think that's great. I've been really curious, you know, here at Queen's Theater, because we're largely presenter, we don't have a lot of, we don't have runs long enough to have mask days and non-mask days oftentimes. I'm really curious about this development of treating mask performances like an accessibility feature day, where like today will be a mask day, today will be audio described, and it's a strange one.
Yeah, it has sort of become that. It's sort of become intertwined with that, because we learned very quickly that for disabled audiences in particular, that's something that's very important to them. It would be very important to me if I was just coming to a show. And I don't plan to attend any shows anywhere without a mask on anytime soon, regardless of what a policy is for a particular theater or industry. So we learned very quickly that that was really important, and we worked as fast as we could. Now, granted, the public is sort of big time-ish in their ability to pull the weight, so it worked out.
Did they support you in that, or did they push back? Did you have to like battle with them a
If
little bit?
anybody pushed back about it, I don't know. There were so many layers of folks to get through and across. As far as I know, we asked for it and it happened. But again, I understand too that that's a relative luxury, and I'm very grateful for all the people who, if there was pushback, they pushed against it and we didn't find out about it. Now, if you were having a chat with Ryan, he might tell you a different story. But as far as I know, we asked for it and it happened.
Great. I love it. That's like quite a story where everything's going your way. And
It's never happened to me at any job or any juncture of my life.
doesn't
So
happen
I
to
will take
any of
it.
us. Yeah, it's
I
cool.
will take it.
Really quickly, because I know your time's limited and I know others will have questions. Talk about your work as an audio describer, how long you've been doing it, how you got into it, like kind of the framing principles of it and what you think is important for us to know.
Okay. Well, I will tell you that I got into audio description formally out of annoyance. I'm a disabled person. I'm someone who can't walk. I can mostly see okay. I'm on this sort of, don't tell anybody, but I'm on a fine line between I can mostly see, but maybe I'm slightly visually impaired. It's a fine line. But I have plenty of blind friends and acquaintances. And I was getting annoyed at having to be people's personal audio describer. So I said, this is really, really annoying. And it coincided with the advent, or I should say the bad time that was Netflix getting in trouble for releasing a Netflix original show about a blind superhero and somehow not having description available. I don't know if you remember, but that was the great Daredevil kerfluffle of 2015. When Netflix released Daredevil, it wasn't described. And folks took notice. Just as many years before, the deaf and hard of hearing community had really put their weight behind making closed captions a widely available feature. The blind VI community really pushed back because they were like, what the fuck? This is a show about a blind superhero and there's no description. So Netflix didn't want to be sued about that. And that really set the ball rolling. And so from that point on, very quickly, Netflix originals, or the shows that they call original, because having worked as a captioner and describer for Netflix, I know that they just buy properties and call them originals. Now all their originals have to be captioned and they have to be described. So I started more locally with, our disability culture, what we call our crip culture performances. I'm not a great live describer, but that's where the need was most apparent. I took a few workshops here and there, but I was largely self-taught. And so my work started with smaller companies, smaller productions, videos on YouTube here and there. I was already doing captioning for TDF actually. And it's like any kind of gig work. I was picking up audio description is very divided between scripting and narrating. So I did a lot of script work for bigger things like Netflix and stuff. But the narrating, it's like any other acting work. They audition you, they choose you if they like your voice. So I never quite cracked that code. But yeah, I've done a lot of local performance audio description work. I would be happy to be put out of business as a describer with this great, wonderful new movement that exists where sighted folks will write AD scripts, but in collaboration with blind narrators. Blind narrators narrating the AD is great and wonderful and exactly the right direction. So if I never describe anything again because the blind narrator is doing it, I will be happy about that. But yeah, I do only have a few minutes, but I'm happy to sort of take any questions about any of it.
Go, Ashley.
I did a presentation last time we met in class on Krishna Washburn, and it was funny because there was a picture of you on one of my slides, and Dominic was like, "Hey, I know that person." So my
Kristen
question
Washburn
is,
is my other boss, yes.
so that's my question. I was lucky enough to get to watch the virtual premiere of the telephone film, and so I'm just interested in your experience on that film, if it changed your perception or like reinforced your ideas about audio description, and like what you see as the artistic trajectory of audio description.
Okay, well, as I mentioned, Krishna Washburn is my other boss. Krishna Washburn and Heather Shaw made a film called Telephone about audio description in dance. Now, I work for Krishna in an administrative capacity only. Krishna teaches blind and low vision people how to dance and how to audio describe. I have never once described for Krishna because Krishna is continuously self-describing every dance and audio description class that she teaches. That is her pedagogy. I don't do that. And I would never, because she knows exactly how she wants to teach her blind students how to dance. Audio description for dance is unique to all the other forms of audio description, and that it's audio description in itself. I still think of it as the Wild West. All of its sort of norms and best practices are still very much all over the place. Each of the streamers has its own rules and preferences, but audio description for dance is the least sort of developed aspect of the field so far. And so what Krishna in particular is doing is very different, because she is teaching how to self-describe from a blind dancer's perspective. And she's the only one doing that right now. And she is burning the candle at both ends. She gets paid, quite frankly, very little to do it. And she wants to be able to replace herself. So telephone film is in its own process of, we want to make sure that folks can see it, but not unlike what we were discussing before, the money isn't there and there's rights involved and all of these sorts of things. So to answer your question more directly, on April 1st and April 8th, Darkroom Ballet with Krishna Washburn is hosting free Zoom-based, what we call no diagram anatomy classes. And so these are arm classes. We've done butt class and foot class and all these sorts of things. So Krishna basically becomes an anatomy textbook describing in great detail each part of how these parts of the body work for folks who cannot see them. And so these are taught with blind people specifically in mind, but everyone is welcome to attend. So a better answer to your question would be held in a no diagram anatomy class, because only Krishna can describe to you how she would talk about the body if you couldn't see it. What we're doing here at Dark Disabled Stories is very different too, because it's, as I was saying before, the sort of guiding principle of standard audio description is you show someone what's happening, but you don't tell them what's happening. Well, that's boring. That's boring, and it has dictated how AD sounds and what AD includes. And sort of AD is something that gets slipped into the blank spaces of time that exist, you know, and you have to script it so carefully and say it so quickly, and things get missed. Audio description is only now sort of expanding into what's literally called expanded audio description, where something is stopped or played more slowly, give room for what's actually happening rather than what you can describe in 2 seconds between one bit of dialogue and the next. People are sort of breaking through these prescribed notions of what audio description is and should be. Right now, there are no best practices, and there shouldn't be. People should describe in all kinds of different ways. You know, there's audio description for educational settings, which I've also done for Queen's Theater at TFA, and that's a whole other way of describing, because quite frankly, it also involves behind the scene work as someone who's trying to help with making documents more accessible. I mean, audio description is everything all at once sometimes. But I would definitely recommend folks with an interest, especially in dance, because right now Krishna's the only one doing dance AD, but there are other options, there are other workshops out there, there are other resources out there, folks that are teaching how to do audio description in about 1 million different ways. There is a filmmaker named Jordan Lord, and they make films which are basically described at every moment, much like how Krishna would teach a class that she's constantly describing. The description is the narrative. It's like reading a book. A book describes itself to you. It has to. That's how Jordan Lord makes their films. So I would recommend checking that out as well. That's a whole other way of making a film. I mean, we could talk about the different ways people are doing AD for the next 2 hours. But I love talking about it. So if we're doing another class where I can talk about AD, bring me back and I'll bring Krishna and I'll bring Jordan and
Do you want to do that? I can make it happen.
let's do it.
All right, I can make it rain for them $100. That Idaho, that Idaho Benjamin Franklin.
You got it. Let's do it. I'd be happy to help.
Cool.
I'm hoping she makes a pay-to-play version of the film so more folks can see it. It premiered
That is,
here in
that's the
Florida.
goal.
Awesome.
That is absolutely the goal. And telephonefilm.com is always looking for more places to screen and share while we get that streaming option going. So yes, that's my other hat, admin for Darkroom LA with Krishna Washburn, darkroomla.com. And right now, getting ready to get into costume and be an actor for the last 2 weeks of Dark Disabled Stories here at the Public Theater in
Tell
New
me how I
York.
can get in.
You,
Yes.
yourself, you
Yes.
want to come to the show? I'll comp you.
Okay, I want to email you.
Yeah. Yeah, email me, I'll comp you.
Okay, good, because I'm like,
Yeah, I've got 2 comps left. You can have one. You got it, baby.
I love it.
All right, I've got to run. Thank you all so much. I hope to be back and we can talk more about AD. I know Krishna would love to talk about AD for dance.
Oh, let's do it.
And I've got other AD friends too.
Let's make a party. We got it.
All right,
I have to
you
figure,
know where to
I have to,
find me.
I have to figure it out a little bit schedule wise, but I'll do, that's awesome. We can do that.
No problem. Thank you all so much for having me.
All right, take care. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, have a great night.
Bye. Silly me, when she hung up, I almost hung up the Zoom as if I was leaving. That was cool. That was really cool. I was like, stop by for a little bit. And that was like, I didn't know about all that stuff. So, and she said Krishna's the only one doing dance. However, I can tell you with certainty that in the dance space in New York City, dance performances have more audio description than any other art form, more than theater, more than museums, more than Broadway. Dance has the most. So I don't know if that, I mean, I'm assuming that's true. So she must
She's
have,
the only one self audio describing the movement that
maybe
she
so, but
made.
it's so about, I'm like, man, maybe she has 1 million minions. I don't know, but there are,
Well, so the list of audio describers on the film is extensive, and Alejandra is one of them. And so in the film, other audio describers do describe, and some of them wrote the description that is narrated by other blind dancers. So I think that's what she was trying to say, is like Krishna is teaching which I didn't know. She doesn't talk about in the film, because I think this is a new
yeah, I didn't know
like
that.
a new outshoot of what she's been doing that has happened in the past few months, which is fascinating because I just had heard like a little bit about it after I made my presentation, but that was really neat to hear the unfolding of it all.
I will tell you, even the documents that we're going to look at today, like the Dance NYC documents, dance is just farther along in all of this shit than theater is. It's just a fact. They've been doing it longer. They have more documentation. They have more history. They have more grant funding and support institutionally. Dance is very, very, I wouldn't say they have all the answers, but they've been leaning into this a lot longer on the accessibility front in general than theater has. And so theater borrows from dance and Dance NYC a lot. specifically. So it would be interesting to kind of get into that a little bit more.
But
I
not the
hope
New York
that
City
I will say
Ballet.
on the record right now, I hope that I can make that day that she was kind of pitching off the cuff happen, because that would be cool, right? Would you all be into that if we did that? Great. Cool. Before we go back to presentations, any other thoughts, responses to what she offered us? Yeah, I know, right?
Have you haven't seen the piece yet?
That
she's in
Dark
town.
Disabled Stories? No.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was gonna offer the writer a workshop here as a solo play. At that time, she said he'd been working on it since 2017, but last year, I think he said to us, maybe had been writing it, but he's never performed it. And he has other plays that he has about like, he had a show that was about Tinder. It was like as a brown disabled man on Tinder, on Grindr, I think. It was like basically it was basically like all of his fuck stories from from like all these things, and then he put into like a kind of like monological show, and it was kind of subversive because of all the queerness and bodies and all the stuff that we're not accustomed to seeing. He was really putting that forward, and it got him a lot of attention for that show. And he's very Ryan, if you don't know Ryan's work, he's kind of like built to be a superstar. So I wouldn't be surprised if Netflix or something picked him up, because he's leaning into the stuff that like we don't often talk about. It's like the intersectionality of like blatant sexuality, queerness, bodies, all the stuff front and center, right? Very unapologetic, very out there. And it's really cool to see. And so if you are like one of the people that likes more tame, family friendly sort of entertainment, that's maybe not the performer for you to check out. But if you like more of the risque stuff that looks at these themes and ideas, like this would be like, his work would be like hitting on all cylinders for you. It's the opposite of Cinderella there. For sure. So he had this thing, Dark Disabled Stories, that he wanted to workshop, and I offered him a spot. He didn't have the capacity to really do it at that time, but it was a monological show like his other work. And what I was trying to point out is like during this year, I think it was May of last year. It's like, so it's less than a year, 11 months, 10 months or something. Yeah, not bad, Cinderella, which someone on our staff is audio describing for Broadway, actually. Robert Benatti, who works here at Queen's Theater, is the head audio describer for that. Yeah, but to incorporate Alejandra and other performers to make it a ensemble show, to get it workshop produced, co-produced, and extended within, it's just like the timeline on that is incredible. And like cost of living, while they might have been working on it for years, like they were actively trying to get a production of it for many years, and it eventually happened after COVID. This like went like just just clear lane all the way through. And the fact that she was describing a accessibility dramaturg and a team of people and all these folks that they hired at the Public Theater, which has endless money, to put folks front and center to really make sure everyone's doing okay. And I mean, check-in meetings, like that is just the complete opposite of what we heard from Greg at the Broadway level, right? So maybe they're onto something, and hopefully they can document what it is that they're doing in that process, because I just saw a performer beacon that she was very, very happy with the situation and what was going on there. And that doesn't happen too much. Let's say that's great. I love it. So I'd be really interested to see like a little bit of a case study on that, and what kind of learning we can do as a field from what they've done to stack the deck for that particular production to feel that way.
I wonder if it has anything to do with like the actual venue, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
support of the folks that are like communicating with the union. Do you know what I mean? Like, and the way that they say it,
It's the
the
public, yeah.
parameters they make. Like,
Of course. You also have to recognize that the public's always a little bit of an asterisk, because they are, if theater is a mafia, they are one of the bosses, right? They are the public. They have more. I think they're the richest theater in the United States by far, far, far. Or certainly the richest theater in New York by real estate, by contributed income from earned income, from foundational support, from government support. They're a core member of the CIGs, which my executive director was the chair of until just a month ago. They are if this is Star Wars, they are the Death Star. I mean, you can't get bigger than that theater. So in a lot of ways, what they dictate and demand is like it's precedent setting for the field in so many ways. And it was just interesting to hear that they did that. They haven't traditionally, like, other than their space, they've been dinged a little bit in the past for their accessibility stuff, like especially at the Delacorte and where they do Shakespeare in the Park and things like that. Greg was in that production last year, Richard III. It had all these disabled actors, but had like an able-bodied Black woman as Richard. And it
It's
set up a
gonna
lot.
be streamed. I mean, not streamed. It's gonna be. It has a recording that they're dropping. Have you seen this in the
Richard
news?
III.
That version, that Richard III is coming to something. I don't
Oh,
know if
how
it's
weird.
National Theater at Home or Broadway. I don't know. I was on something and I saw the like
Oh, that's what-
promotion for it, and I was like, oh, interesting.
I was really thinking they would probably bury that one. It got really prickly responses, but I think there's something to watching controversial art, right? I mean, we might look at it and find something we didn't expect and that we appreciate, or we might look at it and be like, that's fucking bullshit. Like, who knows what we'll take from that, but it's an interesting, I appreciate putting it out there and not shying away. I don't know how it went. I honestly don't know how it went for them, but the reports from the performers it was a very mixed bag kind of. Yeah, I'm curious too. I saw it and I'm curious what they will yeah, it's a little bit of a head scratcher, but
I'm trying to find the thing I saw, and I'll put it in the chat if I find it.
Cool. All right, enough about that. I'll work to make that happen. If you have any other final thoughts, please share or just shout out, raise your hands, whatever. But let's wind back to the presentation. Did we lose Laura again? No, she's here. Okay. So hey, all right, traveling. So thoughts, responses, signals of appreciation for Laura's presentation. Go ahead, Nick.
I just see him.
Oh, I think
I was doing it. So.
I love it. I've never, again, another company I've never heard of. I love seeing the connection to Ellen Stewart, which is, she has that. They think they just sent out the call this week. They do that director symposium in Umbria every year. And I always go, oh man, I wish I could go to that, but they don't ask me to be a part of it, and it's very expensive. So I wouldn't go to that, but it's cool. Ellen was she died a couple years ago, and her legacy lives on, and she was really instrumental in experimental and downtown, what we no longer call downtown theater here in New York, just experimental theater. Really instrumental in getting an international presence in our downtown theater community, and that they really are one of the few institutions even now that has a specific focus on international experimental theater in small venue. So you can go to the La Mama at any given day and just see some super wild shit. You never know. They've had Pussy Riot there. They've had stuff that I've seen a cat circus there. The stuff that I have seen at La Mama over the years is always a bit of a head scratcher, and it's always like the place to go to see something weird. So the fact that that Ellen was saying in the presentation that there's this, I think you said that Ellen didn't want anything to do with this, and then came around to it. I'm like, it makes me so curious, if Ellen, the queen of weird theater, didn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole initially. I wonder what was in the practice or in the work that was like setting that off. And now that makes me want to know more about this company and what they're doing, because I found that so curious, because La Mama is like that one place that lives in the world of yes. And if they're saying no, I'm so curious as to why. Do you have any insight into that?
I think it might have been his solo work, and he came there as a teenager, and he was like, "I want to do stuff here," and didn't really have a plan. So I think it was more about that than working with his group of students, because he also was trying to promote his own work.
Gotcha.
And I think she was like, "Yeah, come on." Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm super interested in their like sound work. As a musician and a person who studied how to like facilitate expressive arts, we do lots of like sound circles, which are kind of like entry points for folks who might be less inclined to want to participate, because you just literally make a sound to contribute to the like soundscape. But that's what that sounds like, and it is very accessible, because sounds can be made in so many different ways, not just vocally, you know. So I think that that's a really cool element that they added to their productions, to not make it so voice like focused.
Yeah. I remember seeing that in the warm up, and they started with it, and it was sort of, some of it was instruction, and other elements of it were just sort of like letting it happen from the actors. And it was obviously a warm up. They've done a lot, but it's pretty cool. I think there's a video. I'll look for the video. There's a video of them doing the warm up somewhere.
I love it. I'm going to look at it. I also love the idea that they would bring, was that the presentation? They bring people up one by one. Is that this one?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of pictures of Dario like hugging the students, you know, and the actors, and bring them up, and then they each get their own bow. So I thought that was cool, because they're very united as the chorus, doing things quite in unison. And then there's a few actors who do other stuff as well, but I think that's really great how he does that.
I also love the like white, the flooring. They put the tarps up, and it made it look like bootleg Evo Van Hove or something, where like any Evo Van Hove play you've ever seen, there's like a white room where it's a misanthrope or whatever, and it's always a white room, and you know when the lights come up and everything's white and everyone's in white, that shit's gonna get real dirty real fast. And they always have, he's the one that has like the cameras that will like zoom, he'll like project the actors on the screen while you're watching them on stage, and he'll like follow them into the dressing room, and like everything's the stage because it's all filmed. And
That's the man who wrote a play where the ending scene, the whole stage is filled with rats.
Yeah.
We talked about this in playwriting yesterday.
Oh, you did?
We were talking about an interactive element, and then we were like suggesting that it be kept onto the stage, and everyone brought up your rats.
That was that Chris.
Sarah was like,
one
yep.
woman in there that got really mad about it. There's this one lady that just really like, she was like, I don't understand, for like an hour.
Dominic wrote a play about a school board, and at the very end, the entire room was filled with rats. That is all.
Someone got mad at me about it and wrote emails.
I loved it. I don't know. I quote your play that you wrote all the time, and I'm like, oh my goodness, have you heard about this? And yeah.
Oh boy. Wait till you see what I'm working on next.
Also send me that play. Okay.
Oof. All right. I loved it, Laura. I appreciated the company. There's an Italian element, which I just, you know, as a depending on who you say, a first or second generation, I was born here. My parents were not born here. You know, there's very few, other than like in weird international space, like a Lincoln Center Festival occasionally, or like a Mama occasionally, we don't really have any entry point to Italian theater here. And it is the traditions, the forms, the the framework and the soul, we see occasionally see like a Dario Fo play or something like that. But just the sentimentality, the heart of Italian theater, which is so interesting and different, and not like American theater, that I appreciated that being brought in. Also, my spouse is a therapist at a mental health hospital, and deals with that population. And I'm going to share the presentation with her so she can, because I don't think they do anything arts-based there for a number of reasons, probably HIPAA compliance. But there's zero art or art therapy or art integration or anything artful in that space at all. So I was really curious about what it would take in those different systems to get something like that implemented, especially where we, New York, she's in Westchester County where she works. There's no, it's the only mental health facility that serves youth and adults, especially with a wing for this, for the developmentally disabled folks in the whole state. So they take people in from, besides city hospital system, they take people in from New Jersey, Connecticut, all over New England to this facility. And it's a terrible situation there. It's at capacity all the time. So I appreciated seeing that. And I want to share that just to see if that sparks any thoughts from her. All right. Aaron. I know Aaron hates doing presentations. That was a great presentation. Smooth, specific, methodical, thought out, scripted, visual. Good job, Aaron.
Personal connection.
Yeah, personal connection in there, working with the folks. I love that. I always, this is why we do these presentations. We get to learn about people on the ground. I would have never known about any of this stuff. Statements of appreciation for Aaron. Yeah. Again, another artist we didn't know about. The work in DC. Laura's entered the waiting room. Oh no. Okay, we're getting Laura on the phone, I guess, because of the car ride. Aaron, any final thoughts about your presentation? Why you chose this person? Is Aaron there?
Heba is just, she's a really great artist, and I really enjoyed working with her. It was my first time ever working with a deaf artist. So it was, I directed her in the Vagina Monologues, and she sent in a video audition. And I remember when she emailed me first, I was like, Heba, she's Egyptian. I wonder, like, she's going to have this really great voice, and I'm just really going to love the work that she does. And then she sent me the video, and I was like, oh, that's a very different kind of voice. Okay, but I love it. And she was so easy to work with. And then working with her on The Tempest, like when we sat down and I interviewed her for the presentation, she had a moment where she talked about how she just hates when she does shows and she has somebody following her around on stage, because for a normal, speaking actor, you don't have someone walking around with you, saying your lines with you or whatever. And so she was very conscious about trying to make sure that I understood that she wasn't mad at me. And she was like, please don't be offended that I said that. And I'm like, no, that's your experience. I absolutely respect that. It was just one of those things that we were trying something on how can we, incorporate this into the show and make it, a good experience for everybody. And it was fun working with her. It got really confusing after a while because there were 3 of us playing the same role, but we all worked together to make it work out. And it was a fun production, and she's amazing. And I just wanted to boost the signal on her, as it were.
I love it. Is she based in DC now?
No, she's still based in Houston. she was raised in DC, but she's local to Houston, but I think and she told me not to tell people, but she is going to be going to New York this summer for a show.
Well, I think that's great. Especially someone like Ryan knew about her. It might be really interesting because Ryan, intersectionality of the MENA community, the Middle Eastern community here, looking for that intersectionality of Middle Eastern and disabled is really important to highlight.
Mhm.
That's interesting. I love that.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing. I'm like interested in seeing if this is an artist we should have here as part of our cohort.
I'm sure she would love that.
Yeah, I'm interested in learning more. Thanks. Any other stuff for Aaron? Cool. Good job, Aaron. I know you hate that, but you killed it. Casey. Great stuff too. Another company you don't know. Super methodical presentation, all the details all baked in there. One thing that stuck out to me about that was having multiple people like share roles, and I've certainly been involved in like applied theater process and community process where like that practice is very normalized, like especially when you're flexing to be inclusive of everybody and there's not enough roles. You do like role switching and stuff like that is kind of a practice in those spaces. And I thought, oh, there's something very applied theater centered about the about that company and their approach, which I thought was really familiar. And I also appreciated that they don't have a youth focus, which is something we started with here at Queens Theater, and we do have a separate TFA program for youth, and now it's in the schools as part of the municipal program known as CASA here in New York City. But I think that when we hear disability in theater, there's oftentimes a very immediate assumption that goes right to youth population. And I can't tell you how many times you say, you talk about disability in theater, it immediately goes to specifically youth schools and relaxed performances, ASD, like specifically immediately like beacons right to that particular thing. And I'm often finding myself in those conversations. So I appreciate that you spotlight a company that specifically works with adult populations, uses applied theater practice education incorporation, takes like a pretty comprehensive approach to what they're doing, takes a durational kind of approach to people where they're not just trying to get through one thing, but trying to make like relationships over time and commit to the people at the center of it for whatever needs to happen for that particular population. People might go in and out, they might change, but people can kind of be there as long as they want to be there. All that stuff's really good approach, good practice, good framework for making some real change and impact. Thoughts, appreciations, responses to Casey's presentation?
I have an anecdote and a question. I've done the show Avenue Q like too many times for my own career as a puppeteer. And we have a theater group here that does have a youth program, but there's no age limit. So they start with upper elementary students and then go to however long people want to participate. It's called Theater Exceptional. And a bunch of students came to our recent production in last fall of Avenue Q, and they were, one of their leaders was saying like, we're tired of doing like safe shows. And then a bunch of the students were like, yeah, we're ready to get dirty. And I was like, yes, let's do it. So I might be directing that at some point. It's like far off on their list, but I was like, yes, like why not? Like, these are adult people, right? Anyway, I just think it would be such a different approach to that show, and I'm ready to see it change. So if they decide to do that, I'm going to tell them to look up this company and be like, hey, maybe you can use some of their approaches. Also, question, you said they have a rock band program. Do you know if it's the trademarked like rock band program? I took a cool training when I was teaching elementary, and we used like the trademarked rock band program, but I always thought that it would be so good for teaching folks at any level who didn't have expertise in music, because I was teaching like third graders how to, be in a rock band, but it really is so applicable for all things. know?
I don't know if I don't think it's a trademark thing. I know basically what they do is they use colors to represent different chords. And so like green is a G chord because G and green, right?
Yep.
And like, so that's how they do it. The different colors, and it's also it's a color and a shape is assigned to each chord. And so it's like pictured out on the wall, in like big print in colors and shapes on the wall. And I know that they like I've seen them like modify a drum kit, for a student who had very limited mobility, and it's super cool. And she like plays the drum like with her chin, and it's like amazing. I don't think it's a
Well,
trademark.
it sounds like they
curriculum.
adapted it sounds like
Maybe.
they adapted the program, because there are big posters involved and like lots of like visual anchor indicators or whatever, but I love the color and the shape idea, because the shape in the original curriculum is more about like your hand shape on the chord, but
Yeah.
I think that is
This
better
is just
suited.
like the circle is the C chord, and like the square is the G chord. Yeah.
Cool.
Any football fans here? Yeah, it's like a Chip Kelly offense. Like holding up the signs. There's a football coach who very famously like color coordinated numbers and letters and plays and put up like orange A, and everyone would hold up an orange A, and they know it. It was like this super weird thing that he did that worked really well for a little while, and then when he went to another organization, it didn't work as well. But I love that kind of idea, and I love the story about the person counting, like knowing the pages or where they were in the script by numbers, so you can just call the number and then the performer could locate like what would like that kind of negotiation and adaptation. Like that seemed to be like that example is really specific to an individual, but I really appreciated taking time to understand like what works for this one individual, and then like find an artful way to incorporate it into the flow of production. Like that is a really good example of like meeting somebody where they are and kind of like figuring out how to bake that into the cake for everybody. Maybe it was that one performer, maybe everybody learned to work that way, but it was like kind of a thoughtful approach to make sure that one person got their needs and their style of communication kind of met in conjunction with what everyone else was kind of doing in the more dominant approach to the production. That's cool.
Yeah. If you watch the video, where the founder sort of talks about the program, it's funny that you say that, because like her whole thing is like our like main goal is to meet people where they are, and like just figure out like how to get like what is the entry point for each person.
Freudian pedagogy, that is some applied theater shit right there. I
Sure is.
love it. Cool. Any other final thoughts about any of the presentations or what Alejandra shared? All right.
No, but schedule that class. Schedule the visitors.
I'll look into it. If you all are into that, I will definitely make that a thing. She's really, and by the way, that little ding, this is how good of a person she is. She also comments on all of my TikToks where I ran about protein snacks. While we were sitting here, that ding that came in was her like giving me a comp link. Like she like emailed it right away. She's good people. She's good people. Do we need how are y'all feeling? You need a bathroom break? Yeah. Let's take like a 3 or 4, and then we'll reconvene, and we'll push on to the next part of this. All right. I'm eating some soup from Chinatown, and holy shit, is it spicy. My God. All right, when everyone comes back, I'll jump into this.
I have some big feelings about what we read today in conjunction with some practices happening at U of I, especially regarding the UDL and CRP certificate that I have, that didn't include some stuff I think is really important.
There might be a
So I
reason.
want to talk about that a little bit. Anyway.
Yeah, I'd love to, because I have a feeling like accessibility is often swerved in those spaces because it opens up a compliance thing that they don't want to touch.
Or covers one thing and doesn't cover another.
Patchy. Well, holy shit, I gotta put that down. Dude, you know, we're like right at, you know, Flushing's right over there, Chinatown, Flushing. There's 1 million plus Chinese folks over there, and the food is good, but when they say spicy,
What are you eating?
soup. I don't do I know what kind of soup it is? Do I know what's in that?
You can't eat it tomorrow either because it'll just get spicier.
Well, it also just like congeals because there's cornstarch or MSG or some kind of slurry in there, and eventually it turns into like a jello. But holy shit, my ears are itching. All right. Sorry, y'all. Sometimes you go up in those places and you just point. Just like that. and then you get more than you bargained for. All right. So we're back. Here's the deal. To this point in the class, we've looked at, you know, kind of the first part of it is like kind of framing principles and looking at like concepts and things like that, right? And that's been a thread throughout this. And then we get to we spent 5 weeks looking at the plays, which is like the art, some new plays, some historic plays, some recent plays that were really successful. We got to hear from Alejandra today, where she's in a play that we didn't cover because it's not published, but seems like it's going to be in that canon or conversation of like contemporary plays that have been really successful. And then now we have to look at how do we get there part of it? Like, what are the practices? Like, what runways do we to kind of capacity build? And so this next part's like, so what? Like, how do we begin to put some of this stuff into practice? Like, what do we need to do to kind of make that happen? I think it was maybe Catherine Griffin or somebody in the comment thread today was responding to what we said last week in the conversation about Prior Town and staging, like what we can possibly stage. And comments or something along the lines of like, well, if you don't know how to like do this, don't, right? And that's something we've said consistently throughout this. When we're talking about casting, I always like ask you to go back and look at the why, like why are we doing this? Who are we including? What communities we're in conversation with, and like and how we're kind of getting there. And so the function of this next unit, it's not going to be as exciting as talking about plays, but it's practical. It's going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of like very tedious things that are very necessary to make sure that we're kind of like working towards making people not just feel included, but can just arrive there. Like step 1 of accessibility is we said this in one of our former lectures, like we always use this metaphor of the table and like getting to the table, but like if people can't get to the table, it's kind of a non-starter, like they're not eating, right? So like whose table is it? How are they getting there? Who's inviting in? Are we building the table? Are we whatever that is. But we have to we always think about here, especially where we are in the middle of a park, like how do we get people physically to this space? And when they arrive, can they get in the building? Can they get to the bathroom? Can they get to their seats unobstructed? Do they have a hassle when they're doing that? Are they met with people who are going to kind of meet them where they are and make sure that these things happen, that they're having a fulfilling experience, that they can participate like anyone else, regardless of physical ability or whatever the case may be when they come here. And obviously, like, we're talking about buildings, like ADA compliance and physical accessibility is always sort of like the foundational thing when talking about physical structures. Someone's writing in the chat. Here's what people's feelings of something I'm doing prior town stage reading aloud the audience's experience literature. Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit. But I think that is kind of the thing, right? It's like we have to do some foundational understanding, some capacity building, and a lot of like listening and durational engagement with people, communities, populations before we kind of like get to the work. Otherwise, we're making decisions on behalf of people's experience that might not be not just good, but could be really damaging if we get it wrong. I intended to deliver like a pretty long lecture today called nothing works, but we should do it anyway. But I'll give you some of the highlights of that, and I might take you on a field trip in our building to look at one of our restrooms. It kind of is a polemic because there's some interesting things going on in our restrooms there that kind of reflect very well-intentioned but skewed values. And I just would like to kind of see what I'm seeing, get your take on that a little bit, because sometimes best intentions bear weird fruit. And we have some of that stuff in action here. It's kind of funny. But yeah, so right before the pandemic, Greg Muscala and myself, we produced National Disability in Theater, convening here at Queen's Theater, which is about 300 practitioners from around the United States and abroad. These attendees were artistic leaders. They were members of the disability community. They were theater companies. They were artists, abled and disabled artists, deaf, hard of hearing community, you name it, any kind of community represented here. They were government officials from our city, municipal leaders. They were funders, which was the huge draw for people to come. We had the Ford Foundation, the New York Community Trust, you name it, like big funders. The Booth Ferris Foundation, which seeded my job here at Queen's Theater when I came on a few years ago. And we really tried to do a very, very concerted effort to make sure that everything that we were doing here fired on all cylinders for every single person at every single instance along the way. We had captioning, we had audio describers from 2 or 3 different companies. We had ASL interpreters and DASLs from 2 or 3 different companies. We knew that we had a high amount of chair users coming here. So we physically removed the first several rows of our fixed theater in our main stage. So we had, we could fit up to 20 chairs in the theater. We made sure that in our smaller spaces that didn't have fixed theater, more flexible spaces, that we didn't pre-set up the spaces to allow people to kind of like choose their positions, and we could kind of build the space around chairs. They weren't like, putting people in a corner and away from people they wanted to sit with and things like that. We had assisted listening devices. We had, as you saw in those checklists, like microphones that we used in every single space, right? We thought about it. We polled the community that was coming. We spoke to individuals, and we sent out a registration link that had a survey about accessibility needs. Is it food that you need? What is it that you need? And we listened to every individual coming to our meetings feedback about what they needed, how they needed it, what kinds of things would make them feel best served, set up for success, included, whatever it is that they needed, to, like whether it was being in a gluten-free room for eating, whether it was chill out spaces that were apart from people, that were kind of just like quiet spaces for people to like gather themselves, or if it was signage in the restroom, if it was braille and everything, which we already have here, if it was gender fluidity with restrooms, which we already do here. Whatever it is, we listen to everybody's everything, and we tried to do the thing. We tried to be all things to all people, right? And this was not like, again, we have an advisor team of 20 to 25 people who are disabled or in the disability community as thought leaders on our advisory board here. We planned this conference with a high capacity, high staff capacity, high community capacity. And for the most part, it was a good conference. But some things happened during that time that were really interesting, because sometimes in serving one population or one individual, you create problems for others. And here's how some of that went. Here's how some of that went. We have a very prominent director here who is a paraplegic, smart guy. We've been friends for years, way before all of this stuff. And he said, you know what I would really like to see during this meeting? He's like, I'm a chair user and my wife is not. And every time I go into a theater, they have like a wheelchair space set up, and I have to either sit apart from my wife, or I don't get to sit or be included with like in the thick of the conversation, right? So he said, I would really like to see a space where like I could come in a wheelchair, and I could be kind of with everybody, like create the circle, or like sit where I want to sit, and then we can kind of like build the space around the chair users, because he wasn't the only one, right? I was like, yeah, it's cool. We can totally do that. We can just have chairs on the side. Everyone can come in and we can set up, right? We also, in those spaces, have assisted listening devices set up with microphones, and also we're using a microphone, which is best practice in pretty much every accessibility guide, like always speak into a microphone, right? So here's what happens when we're in a room with chair users, members of the deaf, hard of hearing community who use assisted listening devices in these spaces, and request those things, and blind folks and low vision folks all in the same space. Here we are in a space. We get everybody in the room. Evan picks where he wants to go. We create the space around Evan. We're using the microphone. Everyone gets situated in this space. There is a artistic leader named DJ from Deaf West Theater, so I might be presenting with him. For whatever reason, in building the circle, didn't get positioned somewhere in the space where the signal picked up for the assisted listening that was being keyed in, right? We're also purposely talking into microphones, which are omnidirectional in the space so everyone can hear. And it creates this like weird looping effect for the blind, low vision folks, where they couldn't locate our voice in the room. So all of a sudden, we have solved the problem for someone in a chair, created a problem for people using assisted listening devices, and created a problem for people who are blind, low vision, right? And here, Greg and I are facilitating together. We have a blind person yelling at us to get off the fucking microphone. We have a deaf person using assisted listening saying, no, talking to the microphone so I can hear. And yeah, it takes the mic away. Can you hear me? Please speak loudly. I don't need this. Yeah, but the thing is, you do for assisted listening, right? So you do, so it ends up happening. Yeah, right. So we do this thing, we're talking into the mic, and then we're taking the mic away and repeating the thing that we're saying, like you would do in like a rally or something, like the human microphone. So you're doing the microphone, then like the human microphone thing, right? So it's okay because we're in these individual sessions. But as we're moving through hours of these days where there's multiple sessions, in every room we're creating together, in every room there's assisted listening, in every room it created this really interesting moment where we had to stop the session more than one time, just to make sure everybody's needs were met and people weren't getting frustrated, right? And it did. And it was one of those like barrel metaphors. You're plugging the hole over here and another leak springs up over here, right? And despite our best efforts in doing all the like right stuff, right? We're doing all the right things. We're doing all the things on the checklist, all the best practices. It didn't necessarily create positive results for everybody in that space all the time. So we had to do a lot of like in the moment relaying with people to make sure that everybody was like, at one point, Deaf West folks were like sitting in the middle of the circle so they could get the signal to the thing, and the captioning people had to like, we had to like maneuver stuff all the way around. My point is like, not everything can be for everybody all the time. The space best efforts. We did our best, and it didn't work all that well for everybody. It worked well enough, but we got to do it anyway. And we have to take the feedback when it comes in real time, try to make adjustments for people, try to make it so everybody gets what they need. And sometimes the result of that were spaces that were really weird shaped. They weren't circles. They look like Batman or like bat ears or something like this, where like some people were sitting on this one wing because it's just listening. Some people were sitting on this one wing because of captioning. Some people were sitting here because they just wanted to be in the center of things and they were chair users or whatever. So it created a situation where a lot of those rooms were kind of a free-for-all where we just had to let people kind of do what they wanted to do. And a lot of the sessions became as much about modeling and doing the checking in with people as it was about getting to the topic itself. So did it slow things down? For sure. Did we get to like ending points in all the conversations in every single room in every session? No, we did not. But you know what? The thing is, being responsive and being committed to that created a situation where it started out kind of rough, but by the end of the 2 days, we had it kind of figured out and people knew kind of where to go for what they needed. And I would say by the end of those sessions, people were generally pretty happy. At the beginning session, like the first hour or two, when people were getting mad that things weren't working for them, we were like deer in the headlights. And especially someone like Greg, who makes it his personal mission to be like a person on the ground authority for all things, and for Greg to be getting that heat from people was really interesting. And people have generally a pretty low tolerance for the words "I'm learning." They don't want you to show up, and they don't want them to be the guinea pig for your learning. They're showing up assuming that you've already figured your shit out and you have your shit together, right? That's the expectation. That's why we polled people. That's why we talked to people. And it sucks when those things didn't work for folks. But because we were committed to it, and like we were just acknowledging, yeah, this didn't work as well as we wanted it to, and taking people's feedback all the time. Well, this is what will work better for me here. This is what will work better for you there. Eventually it kind of sorted itself out, but even you could see the competing needs of people. What really worked well for one person created a huge problem for another. And that is a panic situation in real time, you know. But the thing is, like, you got to do those things sometimes, because through the process of that negotiation, that kind of in reflection, we decided is really the best way to do the work, because you're on the ground, people, when you're talking to people in real time about their needs, and what an opportunity to have everyone in space together, working it out together as a community. Doesn't always, different kind of fight or flight situation for sure. It wasn't I still when I think about it, get triggered from the panic I have about it because we tried to be so careful and we didn't knock it out of the park. But few do. And for a long time I beat myself up because I thought, God, what could we have done? What could we have done better? And we went back to the basics and we went, did we do a survey? Yeah. Did we poll each individual person for their accessibility? Yeah. Did we miss anybody's needs? No. Did we do a tour with people when they arrived and take people aside and do the tactile tours or audio tours to make sure they knew where the listening devices are, they knew where the captioning screens were, they knew where like, did we do all this thing? Yes, we did all those things. And yet, when everyone's still in the room together, it still didn't gel for everybody all at one time. And you know, that's sort of what it is. And that's oftentimes why companies or events or whatever will offer features for certain communities on certain days, because not everybody works for everything all together. And that's part of the ongoing conversation in the community. But, you know, we try when you're trying to be a space where everybody can be there all at once together and it lives up to that. It's a beautiful thing. And when we don't live up to that or fall short of that, it's really frustrating for everybody involved. It's sad, it's scary, it sucks. It's a kind of failure that feels particularly bad because you put in all of this work to make sure it's good for people and took people aside and let them kind of leave their own experience. It still sucked. But it didn't suck ultimately. It just sucked in the beginning. But because we had our stuff together and we laid that foundation, that flexibility from the community and the flexibility from our team to kind of like work those things out really made a difference. So part of that is like looking at these guides that we set today, because they really do, Dance NYC, TDF, these things are put together because of spaces like we created, where people are coming together and a lot of thought was put into what happened. A lot of feedback was solicited from the community about the gaps, and a lot of praxis, like they looked at it, they failed, they addressed the gaps, they tried it again, they made documents they documented the process, and they tried to make it in a digestible, sort of actionable form of steps that sort of scaffolds up towards the most basic things and the most specific, tedious things, which ultimately make people's experience, what seems tedious to us in planning does not seem tedious to someone in execution. It actually makes the difference between their ability to participate or engage in it, or their ability to get really alienated quickly. So it's all this work sometimes to do something so simple for somebody that they can just be in the flow of the thing that's happening in a very robust and meaningful way. But that's the work. So I wanted to offer that as an example of learning, because we all are going to have to, I'm assuming everyone here is interested in that, and I'm assuming many of you have had these situations where you tried to do something, it didn't work. But going back to the basics, knowing who you're working with and for, who you're creating things with and for, with intent, specifically the people that are coming, knowing where they're coming from, where they're going to afterwards, making sure there's transportation available for people, or that people aren't being stranded in your building, making sure that people know where to go when they're in your building and what to do in every situation, making sure there's people available to kind of engage with folks as they move through their experience, that they have the right food, they have the right access to water, they have the right access to resources, whatever they need. That's all the work. And conference planning and event planning are not that different. The documents that we were looking at for this class particularly are for like conference and events, not necessarily theater, but they're all applicable ideas. And oftentimes many of us will opt to hold convenings or hold space with people before we move into doing plays, before we go into doing work, because that also is the work. And so we could test it by holding space with people for capacity building, for community conversation, whatever, before we move into the work. And we know if we can get this part of it right, where people can show up and convene, show up and have a conversation, show up and talk about something, We know that people had a good experience doing that. They offer positive feedback, or they offer constructive feedback that you can turn into actions to fix the things that didn't work as well. Then maybe you can start to build those conversations towards the art making. So it's all a question of levels on scaffolding and building on, right? Instead of jumping into the deep end and just producing something without any context, which can cause harm to people, individuals, and things. So as we asked in that play last week, you know, what would you maybe do with the staging? Offer that as an entry point to think about, oh, if you did have people that have very specific physical needs, physical realities, and you think about that artistically, like what would it take to get there artistically? Then you have to widen the lens and think about all the elements and things that we have to do to kind of get to that point where we can have that conversation, right? Because that's the work. It's like the root before the tree, right? The other thing I want to say is I'm going to go on a little field trip, and I want to show you in a minute our bathroom. And sometimes the other part of this is like, sometimes they who speak the loudest get the biggest response to things, right? And sometimes advocacy, like anything else, whether it's lobbying in our government or in our university spaces or whatever, those lobbying or those like special interests for one group can certainly create problems or disadvantages for others, right? And so what one can perceive as a win can sort of open up questions and financial commitments and complications for other groups. And I will preface this conversation by saying we support all the people and all of their needs and all of the accessibility in all ways. So if one particular individual or group wins influence and gets something actionable, that's no small feat. But to kind of like zoom out the lens and look at things holistically, it's an interesting paradox sometimes, because we have to ask ourselves as institutions, as practitioners, if we're being holistic or if we're being responsive or reactive, because we're scared of repercussions or backlash or something else, right? So here at Queens, and I'll preface this by saying I love all the people involved in this and support all of the causes. Here at Queens Theater, we have a really interesting situation in our bathrooms. And in our bathrooms, we have put up signs, like laminated signs over what used to be traditionally male gendered and female gendered bathrooms. And these signs say all genders, right? So typically when you come here, anybody, regardless of gender, can choose either restroom, right? Especially in our dressing room. That's great. More times than not, especially with dealing with gender dance companies or cultural performance groups and things, they tend to, even if we have the opportunity to go in either, it tends to, for the most part, generally, let's say it stays pretty gendered, despite the opportunity to go in either restaurant, right? A couple of years ago, we have a trans guy that works here at Queens Theater occasionally. Cool guy, AJ. I love working with AJ. AJ is very outspoken about his needs when he comes here. And one of the things that AJ lobbied the theater for was to put sanitary containers in all of the restrooms, right? So every restroom stall at Queens Theater, regardless if it's a gendered male with urinal bathroom or not, there are sanitary napkin containers in every single stall. And that's huge. I guess the challenge in that is that, generally speaking, there's not a lot of need for that here on a regular basis. And I don't mean to say it's not important. It is important, and that is a huge and awesome thing that we have done. But here at Queens Theater, we have a lot of families. We have a lot of family performance, a lot of cultural performance, and a lot of small children. Here's what's not in our restrooms: changing stations. Here's also what's not in our restrooms. Because our restrooms are technically ADA compliant, not every one of our accessible stalls is actually wide enough to hold a chair. We've also installed guide rails inside of those, which makes the space even more limited. And now that there are sanitary napkin containers placed conspicuously in the way, where wheelchairs can't get all the way in. So now we have a situation in our restrooms here where we have sanitary napkin containers in every stall, technically ADA accessible stalls, and now have features installed in which make them inaccessible, and literally nowhere in either the men's, women's, or genderless plus men's, women's rooms where there's a changing station for children. Now I'll say there's 5 people here on staff, including myself, who have very small children, and whose children grew up here. We all have 5 of us that have children under 5 years old. We don't have anywhere to change our kids. We have to change them on the floor. And certain accessible stalls here, we have a lot of wheelchairs because we are a disability forward theater. They're only comfortable using certain stalls in the building because they know that it's an impossible gymnastics feat to get certain chairs in there. But there is resistance to moving or reframing the sanitary napkin containers to make those spaces more accessible. So this is a little bit of a polemic situation. It's not to say that anybody's bad, right, or wrong here, but zooming out the lens on like holistically, like how do we make everybody feel included all the time? What are the most pressing needs? Wheelchair accessibility, accessible stalls. We have a lot of kids and a lot of families here in performing groups, so changing stations. And occasionally we have a trans guy that works here, maybe once or twice a year as overhire, right? And he can go anywhere he wants. That's great. But we've been beating this drum for years now. Like, where do we put our kids? Where do we change our kids? It's on the floor of my office where I change my kid. Other people just change them on the floor, on the couch. And there's a lot of kids here, a lot. So I offer that up not with any like nice little bow to the conversation, but just to know that like accessibility often goes this way, where like for whatever reason, one aspect of it, sort of what Ashley was talking about a little bit with this training, right? One aspect of something might get catch the ear of somebody at a really certain time or in a certain way, whether it's a fear, like you better do this or else, and we're all reactive. Next thing you know, we're screwing in things everywhere, all over the building. But no one's taking a step back and going, how might we make this situation work for everybody? Do we need better accessible stalls in our rest? Yes. Do we need changing stations in our restrooms? Yes. Is it important to have sanitary napkin containers in all stalls? Sure it is. I mean, like, yeah, we have people here, all genders. It means all, right? But the problem is all also means all, including children, including wheelchairs and everything else. So it becomes this really interesting powder keg political situation here at our theater, where every so often this comes up and no one knows how to really engage or solve this problem. But when the time comes, we're really proud of saying we're an accessible theater. We're really proud of saying those particular details. We're really proud of saying we have gender inclusive restrooms and that everyone can go. But at the same time, people with wheelchairs come, or people with children come, and they're very frustrated. So again, like the conference space where we solve an issue for one group of people, we plug this hole and another one comes out. And there doesn't seem to be any real thought leadership or resolution about how to redesign these spaces to make them really good for everyone. So do I know the answer here? No. All I know is that these things go hand in hand with the work that we're doing, which is we have to do all of this stuff, check these boxes and work these lists pretty tediously, and also look out for these opportunities where there's a disparity in who's being served and to what end. And maybe it's a case-by-case thing to try to figure out how we might make sure that, maybe we have a trans guy in a wheelchair with a child And that guy can do all the things in our restroom, right? Right now, we can't. And yeah, so I think about that a lot. Think about that a lot here, because I think it's an interesting microcosm for what some of this looks like in practice, which is imperfect and skewed. And we're proud of certain things while we hide or run away from other parts of it that are also important. And you know, maybe it's just some food for thought. I don't have, like I said, a nice little bow to lock that up with, but I'm sure you can think about things in your experience where you've seen something like that, and maybe you have the ear of somebody that can make really practical, measured experiences for all. But I find those things really as interesting as they are problematic. And thankfully, nobody has ever complained that, you know, from like you know, we have all this attack on bathrooms right now in our legislation across the country. No one here has ever complained about saying a sanitary napkin, and no one on the staff has ever complained. Like, it's not a, no one views that as a problem, but we view it as also like, we want to change our kid not on the floor, and we want to make sure Evan comes here and can get in, doesn't have to go in this one specific restroom because he can't fit in this one because there's guardrails and a sanitary container preventing him from going in the one stall he should be able to go in, right? And we can't change it for whatever reason. So that's where I'll leave it as we look down these lists, is to keep that in mind, that like part of our job is to do stuff anyway, even if it doesn't work. And maybe if we keep doing the stuff that works somewhat, eventually we'll figure out a better way to do it all together. But we have to give ourselves some grace and some cut ourselves some slack sometimes if things don't go perfectly, and also be still open and vulnerable to the listening and learning and mistakes that are made when we try to solve a problem for one group or one individual and we cause harm or discomfort for another, right? And how do we weigh what's more important? I don't know. All we know is you try to do right by everybody, and hopefully it all comes out in the wash eventually, even if we don't get it perfect for a while. And I guess that's the end of my story. I should take you in there and show it to you. I don't know if my
Yes,
wife.
you should.
That's interesting.
Can I relate this to what I was gonna, so reading these lists, I was like, okay, I have the U of I, UDL, and CRP, Universal Design for Learning and Culturally Responsive Pedagogy certificate. I finished it last semester, right? In preparation to TA and also teach the theater methods class this semester. All right. So I'm like developing syllabi. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to have all this knowledge and I'm going to be able to write this syllabus. But then after I made the syllabus and started this class, I was like, you know what? My syllabus isn't as accessible as it should have been or could have been based on this certificate that I obtained. And I started to question like the why. So you had me thinking about like, okay, we're doing this one great thing, but like big chunks are missing, or like we're not seeing the whole picture. Let me read to you the classes involved in the UDL CRP certificate. Does anybody else have it or is taking it? Okay, because I don't want to bore you, but here we go. Culturally responsive pedagogy is a class. It's more of like the ideology behind why we're doing the certificate, right? It's less about like the practical things, okay? Another one is universal design in learning. That is again like the ideology, the history of universal design starting in architecture, how we think about backwards design for writing syllabi and lesson plans and things like that. It's more like philosophy and ideology, again, less practical information. There is some practical information, but that's where I would think some of this accessibility information that Dominic's been talking about, like lacking for our course, maybe would have been in there, but was very much not in there in like a practical, like, here's how you could do this. Here's how to make sure your syllabus can be read by the immersive reader. Here's the font you should be using. Here's the colors you should be using. Here's how to, anyway, so here's the rest of the classes. And I just want to note that, do you notice something missing? Universal design and learning, culturally responsive pedagogy, gender and sexual diversity in schools, racial and ethnic diversity in schools, socioeconomic diversity in rural schools, and working with Native American students and communities. There's a huge glaring missing thing. And maybe they're going to adjust, or maybe some class, like right now, these are the classes that are required for the course, and then you can take 2 additional courses in different schools. I used theater classes. I used social change and theater pedagogy. I could have also used this class, but I wanted it to be done. But this class would have applied to that 6 extra course requirement. But like in the core of those classes, I would have expected some kind of class about disability, and there's not one. And to not make that a core of that certificate feels like a huge mistake to me.
I mean, it's neglecting 26 to 28% of the population of Earth.
Well, and Sarah's theater pedagogy part 2 is really focusing on neurodivergence this semester. So I appreciate that, like, you know, being explored in the higher education world too. But I just kind of shocks me. Today I was just thinking about it, and I went to look back and I was like, why didn't I have this information? Oh, that's why.
Yeah. Go ahead, Catherine.
I would also, this is just kind of like some observational things, because I have not taken like that certificate pass. I also have marker on my hand. That's why my hands are red, but I have not taken that specific certificate sequence, but I do have a master's in curriculum and instruction. So like I often will go through like the descriptions of those courses, as well as some of the education courses at University of Idaho. And really it looks like, specifically from like a critical disabilities theory standpoint, like that they're still using a ton of ABA therapy-based things in their special education program. They're still talking like very specifically about like a very specific archetype of autistic people and different things. So I think it's not just limited to that certificate, but like that the whole that the university as a whole, besides like Sarah's classes and really the classes in this program. But like, yeah.
Well, I know I have students who have accommodations in CEDAR, but I have never been given that information, and I've asked. And like, that's so, it's very frustrating. And even if you know to do the right things, like,
Yeah, I will say on the staff side of it too, for this class particularly, it's students coming in who needed CEDAR accommodations and never got them set up. And I helped them. I said, for your own everything, like, here's how you do this, right? And they did it, and they got it. And I got a ping from CEDAR saying, hey, this student has an accommodation, blah, blah. And I'm like, good. I'm glad that they're responsive, and I see that. But there's no like runway or follow-up that tells the instructor like what to do to implement. I mean, I know what to do to implement that, but there's not a robust, it's kind of on an instructor to kind of do their own research to figure that out. And so there is something that is a disconnect in that system. Which is unsurprising given a lot of the systems at the University of Idaho are inefficient.
well, it's the opposite of universal design for learning. We're finding out about these accommodations after the fact, then to implement them and change what you're doing, instead of being able to plan for that ahead of time. And yes, if you designed your course in the way of universal design, then it should meet those accommodations.
Yes.
But
Except
if we're not learning about all the different ways to use the, I don't know.
yeah, there's that, and there's also just like the reality
Confounding.
of grading, and in a situation like if you have a class where students don't engage or show up to the program, and then you have to go, hey, what do I do with A, B, and C student who doesn't have an accommodation and doesn't show up to the course, and may or may not have some reasons or needs for that, but they've never been like explicit in any way. And then you have to get locked into the grading, like a bean counting. And so it's an interesting, there's some interesting paradox in these systems that are just inefficient all the way around, right? Because we want the spaces to be for people what they're learning, and to meet people where they are, and welcome all styles and needs and all of that, but that requires communication and understanding for what those needs are, and timeline, and collaboration in that. And when those things aren't apparent, it creates an interesting cycle of punishment and reward that can create a lot of different inequities.
Well, and I've talked a lot, sorry, but the last thing I'm going to say is it's when the like left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, right? I work in a children's museum in my day job, and our museum is very set up, to accommodate whoever comes to the museum. Like our elevator fit, like 45 children in it last week during camp. It's enormous. And we have like additional lifts for different exhibits. And all of the, just like as we're going down this list, I'm like, yes, 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 yes. However, the city that surrounds this area is not. There are no, there's a parking garage, and it is across some train tracks that has handicapped spots. There is a like pull-in behind the building and a ramp that could be used if a family needed to park there and like, use a wheelchair to go up the ramp. But this is a children's museum. Who's going to wait with that child while the parent goes to park in the parking garage around the corner? Like there are so many elements that I was like, well, we don't have control over this. And this aspect of this sucks. And we're doing a terrible job.
Yeah. And here in New York, we have veteran parking next in front of the accessible parking and in front of the family parking. And I was like, I don't know. It's interesting that veterans get the first space and then accessible spaces, and then I always have.
And maybe that's just an element of signage to be like, hey, if you need someone to supervise this person, come in and get, one of our staff. But like, some people might not feel comfortable doing that. I don't know. And I don't know how to petition the city, but
Catherine's asking, we're going on a little bit of a sidebar here. We're almost out of time, which sucks. Out of curiosity, because I'm not familiar with museums, the rate of people coming in and out comparable to theaters, like numbers wise. I think museums generally, the big ones, have a lot, like massively bigger numbers than most theaters, I would say, like incomparably big. And libraries too, which is, I don't know if you've been following what's going on here in New York City, but our lovely mayor has cut funding to the library systems here, which does serve the disability community quite robustly, the homeless community and others, youth, like so many things that are, libraries really are here in New York City community spaces. They are everywhere, but especially here in terms of social services that are provided in libraries. And they're now going to be fucking closed on Saturdays. Cool. So all this stuff's important.
I mean, my question for you, do you feel like with the culture around it is people just don't address it until something happens? It's kind of like, well, we're not going to build a ramp until literally someone in a wheelchair shows up. And we're just not going to, I mean, do you think that like, that's kind of still that old school mentality of like, we're not making any updates until one of those people come out and come to our location? then we'll address
Yeah,
it.
it's an interesting thing in a place like New York City because there's like, I wish I had a better term than grandfathered because I think that.
Yeah, because you deal with like the grandfathered in properties,
Yeah, but it
which like,
has, there's
yeah.
old buildings here that are never going to change that are landmarked and they skirt around rules. But then there's other buildings where like the ADA thing is so apparent in the cultural organizations here in New York City.
Yeah.
Like we have to have all those things. It is not a question. There is budget, like accessibility, accessible spaces is a priority for cultural institution groups in New York City, period. Including audio equipment, including, I had a 1 hour conversation today about how the city works with assisted listening devices and audio describing devices, where now you can get it at any audio house in New York City because it is required by law here in New York City. So you can get it literally anywhere. And people are like, how do I get these things? Like literally call any audio shop. They have these things because they're ADA compliant and we have to have them. Any shop, freaking, like there's no radio, but every audio shop in New York City has all accessible audio equipment now here in stock all the time. And somehow even that messaging isn't abundantly clear. So I think it depends on where you are. It's a really case by case basis. Where you are, it might not be until something happens to make a change. But here, if you're part of the cultural institution group and you receive city or government funding, you must be fully accessible, period. But that's not true everywhere. That's true here in New York City. But even then, it's a struggle within because depending on the capacity of the leadership, the communities they serve, like anything else, some might be really take to that and some might be resistant. And bureaucracies, if someone's a resistant in a bureaucracy, you can slow shit down. And there's always evaluations and things for how to make things ADA a minimal requirement, and like about people who evaluate those things and give citations and then give extensions and timelines and endless extensions for those things that you put into practice. And so there's red tape ways to get around all of this shit. But it's at what cost? You know, and I've been saying all along, you're either like going to be a part of the change that's happening in the world, or you're going to be part of the folks who block it. And like, it's all a set of larger values, right? I hate that we're out of time. We have these checklists. We didn't even get to them, but I guess we could have a brief conversation about, please, if you haven't looked at them, please look at them. And also please use these checklists in your institutions, whether you have these practices in place or not. I was intending to have like 30 or 40 minutes to tediously like go, and maybe we will next class a little bit just to like pick it up and just look through these things and just look specifically at what they're doing. The Dance NYC one has a thing called self-evaluation, which I think is the good natural place to start. Like, who am I and what am I doing, right? That checklist is a really, really good foundational one. And then many of the other ones moving out from that, I would say go to the conference planning checklist, which has like millions and millions of pages there and tabs inside of the PDF, because that's not a theatrical, that's just like any convention event checklist. It's like very dry and technical, but it is super, super detailed and comprehensive. Like, it's so good. It has data, widths, heights. It has like all the things, which seem like nightmares to deal with. In many cases, it is. However, like I said, at the end of the day, you're working with humans with needs, and you do those things, and people are magically in the flow of things like with everybody else. So all that work kind of pays off. You know, it's like someone likened this to Thanksgiving dinner. You do 4 or 5 days of shopping, cooking, prepping, buying pots and pans, and then everyone comes in and eats for 10 minutes. And then it's done. And then you do the dishes. But like, you know, if you do all the right stuff, everyone has a great meal, and right, they remember it. And I don't know if I like that analogy or not, but I think I understand it. And that's telling you how to cook Thanksgiving dinner. Did anyone read them and have like any specific thoughts or questions about it? I am going to dedicate some time to this in the future, but. You're a theater, you're an education institution, you're a professor, a teacher, whatever. You are someone who deals with youth, you work in the accessibility field in one specific lane. You work in or live and exist in a community where these things are not always apparent or talked about. Like, use these lists. These are not academic lists. These are the lists that when any organization in New York City or beyond asks us for how to like begin to do accessibility work, this is what we send them. This is what gets sent out. These are the foundational nuts and bolts texts that people use to start doing this work. These are the documents. They're not like the documents. They are not one of many examples. These are the ones that typically get used. TDF, Dance NYC, conference planning, accessibility. Those are the things. Much to say about that.
One of them has the ADA compliant list too, and so I opened it up to like look at the
A lot of
comparison
stuff.
because it's interesting.
A lot of stuff. And you will get people come in if you're a city building with like measuring tape saying you need to gap this shit out an inch.
I love seeing how comprehensive those lists and checklists were. And I went to 3 academic conferences this year, and I saw less than half of the things on most of those lists.
Yeah, it's interesting how people interpret this too. It's like some take it literally, some take it aspirationally.
I just went to USITT and I saw somebody that was a wheelchair user get stuck on a cable. And
Like a literal, like it
yeah,
snapped.
like they got stuck on like a cable ramp. And it's like, did you try? Not the wheelchair user, the conference. Did you try to make that easier? Because it was like 3 inches tall.
Was it their space? That's another thing. Are they renting it? Like, there's a lot of layers of this, right? And when choosing a site, it's like, is this talking? That's why it's a self-evaluation. Like, who are we? Where are we? What are we doing? Do we control this space, and can we get a certain amount of like control over what we're doing here and make changes to the environment? Or do we have to go to a space and select the space? And does that space have the basic things that are going to make everybody feel met? Is it within the price range? You know, there's so many factors to it. And it's not cheap to do this stuff. It's really, really not, but it is necessary. And as the world shifts, universal design, checklists, like all this stuff is going to be more and more and more apparent. I just learned today that we're supposed to renovate our theater here. And it is getting pushed back 2 years because of city funding. So we have a boiler that blew, so that's going to take priority. So we're going to lose our studio space, which is an accessible space, for 18 months, and our main stage, which is less accessible because of this historic space, which is relatively accessible, but not fully accessible in terms of movement. We can't configure the space. It's a proscenium that we wanted to make more flexible is now getting pushed off to 25, 26. It's good enough, but not great. Are there 2 spaces here? Fantastic. Anyway, we'll look at that more next time. I was hoping to do some small groups and things like that. Does anyone have any final thoughts or questions? Things they want to put in the room? All right. I must say I really appreciate it. Those, especially those of you contributing to the discussion board. Yes, journals are due next Friday, if possible. If you need more time or whatever, fine, just tell me, please tell me. And if you can get them in, that's great. And it's just like a where we are now kind of journal. The questions are in the syllabus. And you know, the discussion board has really been an interesting thing. And I will ask you all to, like, you know, look at the contributions of our classmates, synchronous and not, um, and see where we are. It's a good litmus test to see like where we all are, right? The responses to the readings and the discussion, because we can really tell when things are clicking and when things are not. But what I do appreciate is the like transparency around it, and boldness to put it in the chat. We're not all coming from the same place, and we don't have the same foundational understandings or backgrounds. And it's a good way to put your thoughts, what you're grappling with, and what you liked or didn't like or responded to or had questions about certain materials. Maybe I don't respond to everything, but I note it. And sometimes our classmates here in our cohort, we jump in and we talk to each other in there too and say, hey, this is like maybe a better way to think about this, or are we going wrong, or like here's what's really harmful if we get this thing wrong or right. And I think that's okay to do, like continue to challenge each other, ask people to unpack or say more. Those things are always really useful in this type of learning, where at the end of the day, you know, this is a lot of people. We're talking about not just experience and comfort, but like, you know, this is tied to lives being at stake at the end of the day. And our understanding of this is a humanizing understanding. We're all, even I, you know, we're all learning all the time, and trying to do things better. And there's no downside to engaging in debate or criticism, or to challenging, or to be open to being challenged too. So I appreciate those of you who are taking that there, and we appreciate you. Have a good weekend. See you later. Ashley, I sent you a play.